Let's learn how an interest rate swap works and understand terms of a swap agreement. Suppose that on January 10th, 2000, company hedger has a loan outstanding with principal value of $1,000 and the maturity of the loan is in 2 years' time. Every 6 months, company hedger pays interest on this loan based on 6-month LIBOR. LIBOR stands for London Interbank Offer Rate and broadly speaking is the rate at which banks lend to other banks. So essentially it's a variable rate benchmark. Company hedger has a $1,000 loan on which it pays 6-month LIBOR. Worried that interest rates would rise in upcoming months, company hedger decides to enter into an agreement where it will pay 5% every 6 months to company speculator and in exchange receive 6-month LIBOR on a notional value of $1,000. Note that in this agreement, there's no principal changing hands. The only exchange of cash flows is based on a notional value of $1,000, unlike a loan where both interest and principal has to be repaid. This agreement to exchange cash flows is called the interest rate swap. So from company hedger's perspective, the interest rate swap has had two effects. First, company hedger has been successfully able to transform a floating rate liability into a fixed rate one. So essentially, company hedger had a variable rate debt on which it was paying interest equal to 6-month LIBOR every 6 months. It entered into a swap where it began to receive 6-month LIBOR every 6 months. So the receipt and payment of 6-month LIBOR offset each other, and the only payment that company hedger is left with is the 5% fixed rate payment to company speculator every 6 months on a notional value of $1,000. So the net effect is that company hedger is only left with a fixed rate liability with rate of interest equal to 5%. As a consequence, company hedger has now successfully hedged itself against rise in rates by locking in rate of 5%. So the combined effect of swap is that it pays 6-month LIBOR on the $1,000 loan outstanding, and it receives 6-month LIBOR as part of the swap agreement. And finally, it pays 5% on fixed leg of the swap. So payment and receipt of 6-month LIBOR offset each other, and the only liability that company hedger is left with is that it has to pay 5% on a notional value of $1,000. When a swap transaction occurs, the terms of the swap are listed out in a swap confirmation. The confirmation includes the trade date, which is essentially the transaction date, and in this example is January 10th of year 2000, and also the effective date, which is typically 2 days after the trade date. So in this example, that would be January 12th of year 2000. Fixing date is the date on which the floating interest payment is set, and it may be the same as the trade date, but in this example, we will assume that it's same as the effective date, which is January 12th of year 2000. And finally, it has the maturity date on the swap, which is 2 years from the effective date. That would be January of 12 of year 2002. The swap confirmation lists out the fixed rate that pair of the swap has to pay, as well as the day count convention. In a swap, the counterparty that receives the fixed rate is called receiver of the swap, and one that pays the fixed rate is called the pair of the swap. And day count convention helps us determine the number of days in a swap period over which the interest rate accrues. So in this example, fixed rate is 5% per annum, and day count convention is assumed to be actual over 360. So interest payment is calculated by looking at the actual number of days in a swap period and dividing that by a reference period of 360 days. And floating rate has its own day count convention, which may be same as the fixed rate or it may be different. In this particular example, the floating rate is 6-month LIBOR, and the day count convention we'll assume is same as that of the fixed rate, which is actual over 360. And finally, we have the notional amount on the swap, which in this example is $1,000. Let's suppose that on January 12th of 2000, the 6-month LIBOR is 4%. The first payment will occur on July 12th of 2000 and will occur as follows. Company hedger will pay company speculator $1,000 notional times the fixed rate of 5% times the actual number of days between January 12th and July 12th, which is 182, divided by 360. And this equals $25.27. And in return, company hedger will receive $1,000 notional times the 6-month LIBOR determined on Jan 12th, which is 4%, times the actual number of days in the swap period, which is 182, divided by 360. And this equals $20.22. So since fixed rate of 5% is greater than the 6-month LIBOR, which was 4%, company hedger ends up paying more than what it would receive as part of the swap agreement. Rather than both counterparties exchanging payments, company hedger will make a net payment that equals $25.27 minus $20.22, and this equals $5.05. If the 6-month LIBOR was greater than 5%, company hedger would have ended up becoming a net receiver on July 12th of 2000. So we have learned how an interest rate swap works, the terminology in a swap agreement, and how net payment is calculated. If there are any questions or comments, please feel free to post. Thank you.